Welcome back. It's part 2 of Ask the Sniffer Dog Trainer webinar on behalf of the Canadian Association of Professional Dog Trainers. So a reasonable question could be, what are you going to do with your dog next? One thing that everyone can do right now is play finding food around your house and yard. So a good example is scatter feeding your dog's dinner or treats on different surfaces and locations. For example, outside on your front lawn, the grass conceals the treats. It's hard for the dogs to snuffle around and find the treats. And then you don't have to buy a snuffle mat or have any arrangement other than what's outside on your lawn naturally. A great way when you're tired to exercise your dog and enrich and play. It can get fancier. So if you're at a cottage in the summertime, you can put some weaners at the riverside or lakeside. So right at the dividing line between the water and the shore, and they'll move around a bit. They'll be carried by the water. Some will go a little bit underwater, a couple inches, and some dogs that enjoy the water will even, you find them putting their head under to blow bubbles and get the weaners. And yes, they can smell the weaners underwater. And if you're into tracking, then instead of doing scatter feeding, you would stomp a 3 by 3 foot area for 60 seconds, stand there, and then you're going to put treats on top of the scented area. That's known as a scent pad. And then go get your dog and tell them to find it. And in that case, they'll be associating with the handler's footsteps are associated, that smell, with the food that's there. And if you've done this on grass, try it on gravel, on mulch, on asphalt, on concrete, in the shade, in the sun, different levels of grass. There's all sorts of things that you can do without paying any money. If you're in the Calgary area, check out our hybrid courses in scent detection and tracking. And always open are my online courses. So there's focus, fun, and games, how to be fun and develop rewards and engagement with your dog before you start training serious skills. The 7-day scent challenge is basically imprinting. So training dogs to systematically search for a target odor in the scent detection lab, which is basically an L-shaped set of white boxes that you see in a lot of the videos. And that's the basics. Tracking foundation, and there's also show me. That's how to maximize motivation to indicate using errorless learning for dogs that are at that step. And I hope that our event scent detection will be of interest to many of you, and it goes live this September. So for those of you who've taken the course with the boxes in the lab, what do you do after you've done the course? Well, there's some tests at the end of the course. So that is sourcing a hot box. And also you can challenge your dog to find source within a stack, a tower of boxes where the holes are 1/2 inch apart. And that's introducing some precision. You can also put new objects inside your lab. So you could put a bench, a chair. You could put boxes under and on and behind the chair or the bench. Put strange hot boxes in your lab. If you go to the dollar store, you can get into all sorts of trouble. So maybe mesh containers, wooden containers, things that you're going to put into the lab that your dog doesn't expect, and you can hide scent under or inside of it. And also you can bring your scent detection boxes that you started training on to a new location. So for example, in my beginner classes, all dogs in class have succeeded when we moved the boxes from inside a room to just outside the door in a concrete sidewalk. So in the parking lot, there wasn't a lot of traffic or prey or noises, so that the beginner dogs still recognize that as scent detection boxes and just got on with the searching. It's good to try your first clear search as soon as possible. So that means you're going to warm up with the boxes. The dog finds the hot boxes as you've started with, but then you're going to have no scented box in your usual search area. It's just going to be a little bit after it. So like in an adjacent room. And what you want the dog to do is to search the lab a couple times. They'll be surprised. They're sure it's supposed to be there. And then they will just wander a little bit farther and get that easy win of the hot box just outside the usual area. So that's clearing the lab to go to a new area to find scent. Introduce distractions on the start line. So ways I do this in class are I just put some old shoes or put whatever boxes I have from Amazon or whatever is around the house, or even a bag that contained lunch after there's no lunch in it. So it's clean, but it still smells interesting. Put that all at the start line of the search. Most people start with boxes. And so the dog has to choose, do I get distracted by the objects or do I pass over them and do the search? And the vast majority of the dogs will do the search if they've been properly motivated as their foundation. Try off-leash searches in places where it's safe. If you're not sure, have your dog drag a 15-foot long line so it doesn't need a handle or anything. You don't even need to pick it up, but it's there so at least you can get within 15 feet of your dog if, say, a car comes by and you're not sure about your recall. So always make sure it's safe before you go off-leash. And you can try blind searches for the first time. So blind searches do not train the dog. To train your dog, you need to know where the hides are so you can offer timely feedback. But once your dog is trained, it's time to start having some fun. So an easy way to start is tell your friend it's either going to be in this box or under this chair, both locations you've done before, but now you don't know which one it is, and you have to trust your dog to find it. A frequent concern that I hear is people that want their dogs to decide on their own how to tell them that the dog found the scent. And this one student said, I feel it's my responsibility as a handler to know how my dog's alert. I want to keep the association between finding the odor and the reward as high as possible to keep their love of the game high. So I don't want to interrupt the association by insisting that they do something else before they get their reward. I try to keep the nosework search experience a no obedience zone. I feel like trying to teach and sustain a particular indication just gives you more ways to create problems in maintaining attitude. Well, we should definitely always be concerned with motivation. So that's a valid concern. But look into it a little bit further. Are indications demotivational? They can be. It depends how you train and use them, of course, and how you reward them. So you want to choose a known protocol that maximizes motivation at every step by minimizing errors. So we're shooting for errorless learning. In real life, you can never have errorless learning, but you have less error learning. So you don't just throw a hide into a room and see what happens. Instead, it should be right in front of their dog. So it's an easy win. It's almost guaranteed success. You got a 1-second search followed by a reward. And that helps make your training fun. If you're not having fun, you need to find the problem and fix it. Never apply pressure to a soft, sensitive, young dog. Build drive first before you add rules and control. And never sacrifice your dog's motivation to reach time-sensitive human goals. So it's better to see when your dog is ready. When do they have all the skills? When are you sure they can pass? Instead of doing something like saying, I'm going to enter this trial this weekend and my dog has to do all the searches without food, without having practiced any of those skills. So that's a recipe for frustration and confusion. Better to enter matches and try blind searches for fun before you try it with a pressure situation of a competition. And of course, it depends on how you deal with the pressure situations. If you remember to focus on having fun, that helps your dog to keep on having fun too. Training an indication can be stressful for the dog and the handler, but deciding not to train an indication doesn't mean the stress disappears. So searching in a lot of these places, like searching vehicles, or searching around people, can be uncomfortable for a lot of dogs if they're not used to those locations. So yes, definitely consider your dog's motivation, what they want to do and what they can do. But just saying, I'm not going to train indications doesn't get rid of all these issues. And if you train your indication with motivational errorless learning, then it is not demotivational. So here's an example. Fast forward indication training, the magic of TV, with my youngest dog, Andre. So he's indicating a handler-scented target plate. And this shows you in fast forward from the very first session to preliminary understanding. So it's from 8 weeks to 4 months of age. And I took out the play. I just showed you the work in fast forward. And I want you to think about how would you characterize Andre's level of motivation in this series? TV magic.
If your dog wanders away or starts looking at you, it's because you were too slow. And we need to fix you, not the dog. Okay. So when you lift it up, it's over. So most people want to miss that, but that makes the dog want this thing. So don't miss that, or it'll be so much harder later. Okay, so the next one is going to be, I'm going to help them get into the down position by words, body language cues, by luring with the cues. So basically, I've got to get down to that. So now I want the dog to down in order to get the cue, but I'm going to help in any way possible. So down. So the food in my hand lures them into the down. And it's the same reward sequence. Okay. Or that way. It helps to have really big visible cues. So he's getting rewarded for doing it, but I didn't lure it, I didn't say it, I didn't signal it. Right? Okay, get it? Now I can help by pointing at it with my body and looking at it. You want to help them out? Yeah. Or you try to go, something that would help. Yay, good job, good job. Good job. When this video is done, I will pick it up inside. Was it so good, buddy? Go here. Okay.
All right, so some of the ways that you can evaluate your dog's level of motivation would be if you're working off leash, what happens when the work is done? So on the topic of motivation of Andre, some of the things you can see that demonstrate that he's motivated to do the work include that he's off leash and he's not wandering away or looking away or moving away, trying to leave, but he's focused on the task and he's getting lots of rewards for succeeding at doing it. So if it feels frustrated, if you and your dog are not having a fun, they're trying to leave, or you wish you could leave, or you're not looking forward to training, to me, those are really important signs that change of plans is warranted. So what is the point of all this anyways? Well, when I ask beginners what their dog should do when they find the scent, the people usually say, go for it. It depends. Sniffer dogs need to ignore intentional food and toy distractions to find the target odor. And in competition, you need to find source within 2 inches. So varies depending on the judge and the organization, but with some degree of precision. So a question for you is, do you want your dog to just go for it? Grab that wiener at the bottom of the pool? Or do you want to train a passive indication to prevent going for it? It's all up to you. I want to tell you a story about a student named Lucky. Lucky's a dog who didn't fully understand sourcing yet in my beginner classes. And the handler said that he entered a nosework trial with a vehicle search and reported, Lucky's really stubborn. He wouldn't indicate at all. And the handler expected, since Lucky mastered containers inside, he'd search a vehicle and lie down outside on asphalt. So the moment of truth probably happened when Lucky put his nose at source on the vehicle, let's say the hides at the license plate. But then the handler didn't say anything because the handler wasn't sure, didn't do blind searches very much, and didn't give feedback. So if you miss that opportunity, that split second to reward, a green dog usually moves on to something else. And instead of waiting for an indication, it can really help if you say good in a calm, keep on going kind of marker way, and then follow up with rewards. And at your first competition, maybe don't expect the indication that you're used to seeing. Be happy if your dog makes the effort and finds source. And if you say good and reward, what will usually happen after, if the dog is already trained to do an indication, is then they'll offer the indication and you can give extra rewards for indicating. But relax your criteria if you're in a high pressure, unusual situation that you haven't trained for yet. Be a splitter, not a lumper. So after a trial or a practice happens, it's really good if you can have video to review it. It will make you a better trainer. I know it still helps me just about every time that I look at my video. You see things you couldn't see when you were handling. And I want you to think about what went well. Did you and your dog both have fun? And what areas do you want to work on next? So which links in this train might be weak? The story about Lucky, I think the weakness came between pinpointing source at link number 3. There was the split second moment of truth where the nose was at source on the way by and then didn't indicate because didn't get feedback and so didn't get a reward. So if that's the situation, then you can't train that whole chain better. Training longer searches is not going to make your indication better, but I would isolate probably the indication link, so indication on vehicles, and do that with their handler scented toy. Find a way to teach them how to show you where it is on vehicles before you do blind searches to test that skill. So without video, that's my educated guess looking at the scent detection behavior chain. Here's a question about putting it all together. So there's a trainer who is new to scent, and her service dog is a poodle. She trained on grouse scent that she placed in a deodorant stick and rubbed it on a rag and placed it in a jar. And she was afraid that if she trained on handler scented items, then she was worried that I'm afraid everything I have would already smell like me. The indication that she wanted is sit and raise the left paw, and her end goal is gluten detection. For me to be able to hold a food or container with some sort of food in it and have her sniff it and indicate whether it's safe for me to consume. When I've tried this, she's made it clear to me that I have not broken down the behavior enough for her to understand and make the connection between the 2 behaviors. Do you have any tips on how to transfer between the 2? So it's really hard to say without seeing the video where that breakdown is in the behavior chain and what pieces are linked pieces are weak that they can work on separately. So video would be my number one request there to explore it. So is the work rewarding enough? And ways to find out about that are the rewards that you're using. Will your dog still take them at a pet star? Will they take them outside in a field with gophers? So train harder than just in your kitchen to make sure that the skills and the rewards will stand the test when you're under pressure. In terms of sourcing, I'm going to show you some videos of students doing this in a moment, but sourcing, you're going to have one hot box with a hole, and the hide needs to be secured inside the box right next to the hole. So I'm proposing for the gluten handler to have some sort of gluten that's safely contained inside a hot box with a hole. It's secured there. Maybe an assistant needs to handle that hot box, but turn the box around so the hole isn't facing the dog and see what happens. Does the dog put their nose at source? If they don't, they may not understand the pinpointing the source. I would also do a tower test. So that is a bunch of boxes stacked up on top of each other. You'll see that in a video. In terms of testing the indication, I would look to tell the dog to search one hot box while I sit on my hands, be quiet and still, do nothing until the dog has completed their indication. Then you can mark, say yes or click and go in and reward. So if your dog won't do that with one hot box when you do nothing, then the dog is reliant on your body language to fulfill the performance. And when you no longer have that assistance of your body language, it all falls apart. So see if the dog can really indicate when you are not in the picture. I would try 3 identical objects in a line. So object number 1 would be a distraction. So let's say a box with hamburger. Object number 2 is cold, so a box with nothing in it. Object 3 is hot. So some whatever you use to train your indication or the target odor itself. So the object number 3 is the hot box. And does the dog ignore the distraction in the cold box to always find the hot box and indicate it? If they do, that will tell you a lot about where your performance is at in terms of proofing that performance. In all of those cases above, to evaluate the dog's performance, you need to know where the location of the hide is and provide timely feedback to train your dog. Proofing, what happens later on, is after your dog already understands the performance, then you can start providing intermittent reinforcement. So you might not reward them every time they find their target odor. Sometimes you just praise, and the next time they could get an even bigger reward. But you don't want to do that in the learning stages. And once the dog is trained to proficiency, start trying some blind searches. So you're going to need helpers for you not to know where the hide is, and see if your dog can find it without any help from you. And even better would be a double blind search. So the way that means that nobody in the room knows where the scent is. So there's no judge that knows it in the room. There's no assistant in the room that knows it. The handler doesn't know it. Nobody in the room knows where it is, except the dog has to find it. So I would send my student into a room and I'd say, well, go search the office. When you're done, come back and write down exactly where it was. And then I'll compare what you said with reality. So I'm not going into the room with them. I can't, ooh or ah, or give intentional or unintentional cues. Nobody in the room knows where it is. And did they write down the precise answer correctly or not? Here is an example. And this one is the sourcing test. Can the dog put the nose at source?
This is test number 1, the beginner container search. So fingers crossed.
Yes! Well done! Very good! Woo! You are just so smart today. Yes, well done, my girl. Well done. Woo-hoo.
So things I love about that are that's a fantastic team, and the handler stayed out of the way and let the dog do the job. The dog definitely passed the sourcing test, nose at source, and the handler was completely silent until the moment that the dog's nose got to source. When she marked it, said yes, praised, went in and gave rewards at source. So that's a successful sourcing test. If it doesn't look like that, then you need to work on your sourcing separately away from the rest of the stuff. So ignore the indication, that's only about sourcing. Here is the tower test. So stack of boxes with holes, only one of the boxes is correct. And is the dog confused by the situation, or do they put their nose right at source? And then again, we're ignoring indications. We're going to mark and reward for finding source in the tower test.
Yes. Good, 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 good. Yeah, yeah. Good. Yeah, yes.
That makes me smile. It's nice to see the enthusiasm of the team and passing the sourcing test. So the dog is not confused by multiple choices all right next to each other, nose at source, and the handler's working on marking and rewarding sourcing. And so the dog's proficient at that. That link's good, and now they can move on to other things. Here's an indication test. So this one was when I was injured. I was handling this in a wheelchair. And that was my bed bug detection dog. It really helped me to do calls when he had the independent performance. So doing the systematic search followed by the indication without assistance from the handler. All right, putting it all together. When I train detection dogs, I start them on a handler-scented object or toy. So Andre had that red piece of rubber or silicone with my scent on it. And I'm often asked, what did you add? What scent is that on the object? And what did you put in the box? So there's the sense from where that object was manufactured in the dollar store and where it was transported and things it's touching in all the searches where it's been. And then there's my human scent on it. So you don't have to add any other scents to the object. You don't have to add gross scent or vanilla or anything fancy. Your dog can detect the object, so it can detect that rubber or silicone object by itself. Even if you handled it with tongs and gloves without your human scent, they can detect that object. And as a separate thing, they can detect your freshest handler scent. Even when it's your house, you're standing there, your scent's all over, they can find the freshest scent on that object for you. So there's no need to make it more complicated. And that's a really elegant and convenient situation. So if I have a gluten intolerance, I don't want to deal with a lot of gluten, but instead I can train my dog to proficiency on the handler scented red piece of silicone and worry about the gluten later on. That brings in the question of odor hygiene. So once you're dealing with target odor, a question for you is, are you handling it properly using gloves? Are you removing the scented garbage from your house? So if you peel your gloves off after handling target odor and you just put them in the garbage, then that scent is distributed all throughout that room of the house. And you're no longer having that clean training. Was any piece of it left in the garbage bin? Was any piece of it on the floor? If you're using grouse scent, are you storing it in an airtight container in a room that the dog doesn't visit? If you're using improper odor hygiene, then you don't know where grouse scent is. It could be all over your house. Your dog knows it, but you don't. And the problem with that is that they're not getting rewarded for finding it, and that's counterproductive for you. Once again, your dog can find a handler-scented object, even if it's in your house and you're standing there during the search. Tracking dogs have the track layer and the judge walk behind them, even though it's a track layer's footsteps they're following. You can train your dog what they're finding and what not to find. And I think a lot of those issues are what we imagine is difficult, it makes it fascinating. I think that's a really incredible thing that dogs can do that. No matter how we intellectually understand it, it's difficult to relate to and understood. But trust your dog's nose. They are able to do that when that's your expectation. And when you are careful enough to know where the odor is so that you can reward them for finding it. And for example, I have some dogs that are multi-purpose. So the bed bug detection dog that does tracking has different verbal cues and environmental cues. So inside a house, when I say bugs, the dog knows to search the bed because he knows that's probably where the bed bugs are. But if I'm outside, I'm not saying bugs. So it's a new cues outside, and there might be a tracking flag. I've got the tracking harness and long line, and I say zoo means track, and he knows what he's looking for in the field. So just be careful. It does make it hard if you're not careful in your multitasking. So for example, long ago when I had a hunting dog that also did tracking, it was pretty humorous when I hid and my dog was supposed to find me, but then birds ran across the track and the dog's face was pretty humorous, wondering which one of those to follow. Eventually found me, but it's not as obvious when the environment's the same, and sometimes you want the dog to search for one thing and sometimes you want them to search for another. It's entirely trainable, but not many teams train to that level. In nose work, it is not, you're going to find birch today, and tomorrow you're not going to find birch, you're going to find anise. It's find any of the target odors in the set used by that organization. So birch or anise or clove, some mixture of those. But don't find anise today. So you don't have to worry about that. And in your debriefings, again, I find it really helpful to look at this picture and say, which parts did the dog do well and which parts does the dog need to work on? Of course, the handler needs to help the dog to work on those. And it was a student that explain to me what the moment of truth is, because I didn't really think of it in this way, but this graph shows performance over time. And the dog going up the hill at all those 1, 2, 3, and 4 seconds are opportunities to reward. The dog is succeeding. But after you push the dog over the top of that hill and you're in the red zone, the rate of reinforcement plummets. So that's when you observe behaviors of undesirable actions like barking, leaving source, giving up. It's because it's no longer rewarding. So unless the dog's been trained at all links of the chain, there's a split second when you can reward success, or you miss it and the dog doesn't get rewarded. You might think that a large jump in difficulty is a shortcut to your goal, but crashing and not being rewarding is a hit to the motivation of your team. So be more rewarding whenever you can, maximize motivation and clarity. And after you've done that hundreds of times, then there's a more reasonable expectation that you can start to challenge the dog and they'll know what to do. So that moment of truth doesn't pass in just a fraction of a second and your dog is still rewarded. Another question about gluten. I've switched her kibble to a gluten-free version for my own safety and for her not to have a lot of exposure to the scent before she is trained to detect it. How important is it for her not to be exposed to gluten before, during, and after I train her to detect it? I know that novel stimuli are easy to train for, but she has eaten lots of gluten in her lifetime. Does she need to be as strictly gluten-free as I do? And my answer would be, well, first of all, a caveat. I've trained medical detection dogs and service dogs, but I have not trained a gluten detection dog yet. So I would get the advice of an expert if you can to confirm, but based on the evidence available to me, I'm completely comfortable in saying that the gold standard is that there's no gluten anywhere, anytime, unless it's that time when you're either training the detection in an appropriate and safe way, or your dog is actually doing the test of, is there gluten in this sample or not? So that's the gold standard, is the only time the dog is exposed to that substance, the target odor, is in a training or testing situation where they will be rewarded at least some of the time. because in the beginning, every time your dog finds gluten, you want them to be rewarded. That's constant reinforcement. That's how you build the value and set up that dog for success. But at more advanced stages, the dog can definitely learn to only detect target odor when you ask them to. So for example, I've trained almost all of the dogs, I think all the dogs I have right now were started on handler scented item. So it didn't matter. It was a silicone or rubber piece with my scent on it. And eventually I kept those objects away from them so that they were scarce and valuable and only bring them out during training. I do that as much as possible still. But nonetheless, the dogs do not just randomly indicate me or they know that I'm there, but they learn to only do the search and indicate that behavior chain when cued. So eventually you're going to put it on stimulus control. The dog knows how to detect my footsteps when asked to do so, but when not asked to do so, there's no reward. You can follow my footsteps, that's fine. Sometimes they do that. Sometimes they check the cupboards and I just ignore it. And in that way, I haven't had a real problem with that. So I don't believe you would have a problem once your gluten target odor was on stimulus control. But if anyone has different information, do let me know. Question about pawing indication. I'm taking an online course about finding lost pets using scent detection. Is it okay to train my dog to indicate buried pets by pawing? Are there any situation where pawing is desirable? All right, there's a couple that I can think of. So first of all, I've trained dogs for truffle detection in Italy, and I trained the usual indication. So it was either focused attention, the freeze and stare, or it was a sit or lie down, and dogs succeeded in that way. There are many truffle detectors, including some in Italy, who prefer the dog to dig at the ground where the truffles are buried, and that will work. It's up to you. So pawing may be a suitable indication in that case. Pawing could be good if you have a search and rescue dog that is searching an avalanche zone for survivors. And if they find someone under the snow, they will start to dig, and that's their indication. That's a serviceable indication indeed. And I think that in the case of finding lost pets who may have died and been buried, it would be suitable for your dog, if trained, to indicate the burial site by pawing at the area. So it depends on the situation. It's all up to you. But for most jobs, pawing destroys property and disturbs the searches and is faulted or failed in nosework competition. So if you're a beginner, avoid pawing unless you have a very specific reason for doing it, because once you've turned it on, that's hard to turn off. And the most important thing, if you only remember one thing today, it has to be fun. So you're not just training skills, you're training a feeling with your partner. Here's a nice example of Wellesley, an Afghan hound who's going to ignore several advanced distractions, including handler motion, other dogs, and other toys. Check this out. So that is a foodstuff lotus ball, which is available from Clean Run online. There's a similar product called a Kong Ballistic Hide and Treat that's available in pet stores and on Amazon. Basically, it's a foodstuff ball. So he's trained to find the handler scented ball with and without food. And as the reward, he gets to chase the ball when it moves along. And in this one, it was an extra bonus because it fell open and the food fell out, which dogs always love. So if you're trying to get a dog interested in toy play, the lotus ball and the Kong Ballistic Hide and Treat are great ways to train your dog to search and indicate, like Wellesley. So what's next? Thank you for listening. I hope that captures a lot of the most frequent questions. Don't forget that registration is open now for my online courses with complete protocols and troubleshooting, and fun is guaranteed. And this would help you to get answers to more of your questions. Here's my email. Please reach out to me. I want you to succeed. I want to help you to get there with your dog, and really enjoy watching all of the students grow. So thanks to all of you that sent the questions and shared your experiences. And also here is the LinkedIn page for the Canadian Association of Professional Dog Trainers. If you have a dog training business and you're on LinkedIn, please connect with us. It's another way to stay in touch, and we'd really love to hear from you. That's the end of the webinar. So thank you very much. Thank you, Canadian Association of Professional Dog Trainers, and hope to see you again soon.